the rock stars, but we move in totally different worlds, right? The rock star has certain kinds of things that matter in certain kinds of ways, and they experience those things differently than I do, right? Like if you give me a guitar, I wouldn't know whether it's a high quality or a low quality, whether it makes a great sound or doesn't make a great sound, whether it's comfortable to play with or not, right? I wouldn't know. But you give a guitar to a great musician who knows maybe a great guitarist, and they'll know instantly, right? And they'll experience it and feel it differently than I would. Same guitar in totally different worlds, right? That's the second meaning. Heidegger's not going to deal with that a whole lot, although it's kind of part of everything. But so then what is this one? This is the one that matters.
The world that you were in?
Yeah, the world that I exist in, right? The world that you or I or some particular Dasein, right? The world of some particular Dasein, my world, right? And in some, you are your world, right? You carry it with you. You can never escape it. You never get out of it, right? It is always there. And then the worldhood is trying to understand what that is, right? So when you're actually trying to understand that, and it has its worldhood. Okay, so this takes us up to roughly section 14. Right. Before we leave section 14, let me ask if anybody has any questions about this. Do you feel comfortable with what we've just covered here in our review so far? Okay, so then let's jump on to 15. We're going to review and pick it up again. So Heidegger oftentimes, when he starts a new section, will review what we've done up to here and then adds to it. So sometimes the first paragraph of a section can be a really helpful summary. And if you can't follow the first paragraph, then you might need to go back to the section before until you see, oh yeah, okay, he's reviewing, right? This is often what he does. And we can be grateful to him for doing that, because otherwise the book, it will therefore seem like, oh, he's repeating himself, which he is in the first paragraph because he's reminding you of what we've covered and summarizing it for you, right? So let's read that first section of section 15 together for a second. The being of those entities which we encounter as closest to us can be exhibited phenomenologically if we take as our clue our everyday being in the world, which we also call our dealings in the world and with entities within the world. Our dealings, right? If you look at the footnote for number 2, so if you're not doing this, it could be very useful. They will give you a footnote for the 3 ways in which things break down, which is a really useful footnote, and I'll call attention to it. But look at the footnote for number 2. Umgang is the word here in German, right? It's giving you that. This word means literally a going around or going about, in a sense not too far removed from what we have in mind when we say that someone is going about his business. Dealings is by no means an accurate translation, but is perhaps as convenient as any. Intercourse and trafficking are also possible translations, but you can see why they probably didn't choose those either, right? Intercourse here meaning having to do with or being involved with between two things, but it clearly carries some connotations they would want to avoid. Trafficking also, because we think human trafficking or something, right? And it's not just business where you're buying and selling or exchanging things. Dealings, just having to do with how would you dealings? Well, how would you explain your dealings in the world?
Business.
Yeah, just going about your business. Yeah. No hand up, okay. Just going about and living your life, right? Dealings here might have, like if somebody were to start coming up unsolicited, just starts giving you advice, and you're like, don't tell me how to live my life. That's what you mean by dealings, right? Don't tell me how to do things. Don't tell me how to go about doing my thing. I do my own thing. This is my thing. Leave me alone, right? That's your dealings, all right. The kind of dealing which is closest to us, is, as we have shown, not a bare perceptual cognition, but rather that kind of a concern which manipulates things and puts them to use. And this has its own kind of knowledge. So what Heidegger is now moving towards, our everyday dealings, facticity, in our average and everyday sort of way, we don't really notice how we go about living our lives. We just go about doing it, right? And as long as our going about living our lives is not hampered or stopped or made difficult by someone or something, we just go about doing it, right? And so the way that we go about living our lives gets hidden by the very act of just going about living your life, right? You just don't notice your average everyday dealings with the world. Nonetheless, this involves using and putting things to use all around you. It's just what we do with stuff, right? Our lives are full of things that we just use as part of our living in the world, going about doing things. So if we look, yeah, I want to just keep reading with you because I think in some ways Heidegger just says things really well. Even if you just have to get used to Heidegger speak, right? But then once you do, it's not so bad. All right, in the disclosure, and just reading the next paragraph, so what we're after here is the kind of knowledge that comes along with just going about living our lives with things, right? What kind of knowledge is that? We know how to use things is the kind of knowledge that we're going to get at, right? So how is it that we know how to use things is the question. And what someone might think, but this would be wrong, but what you might think is you walk up to something, you see it, and you go, what is that? Oh, that's a marker. What are markers for? Oh, they're for writing on boards. I guess I'll use that to write on the board, right? Like that's how you might think we go about using things, right? So you wake up in the morning and you think, what is that? Oh, that's the sound of the alarm. I have that to wake me up. I guess it's time to wake up now. Now what do I do with that thing? Oh, I hit the snooze button. I go back to sleep for a minute. What is this? Oh, this is the bed. What is this bed for? Oh, the bed is for sleeping on. And what is this? Oh, this is covers. What are these covers? The covers are, right, but so you might think that you just have like this catalog of things that are present at hand in their definitions. And that whenever you interact with any of them, whenever you're going about using them in your daily life, that you think, what is that? You look at it, you see it as a thing that's present at hand, and then you see it as that particular thing. Oh, that's a cover, or that's a pillow, or that's a bed, or that's an alarm clock. And then you draw on your knowledge gained probably through experience or reading it in a book or somebody telling you it or whatever, of what you do with that thing. And then you so you have all of these little bits of knowledge up there in your head, and you just start pulling bits and pieces out as you run into stuff, right? This is not at all what we do. That is what we try to get computers to do with artificial intelligence, right? You have to teach them to be able to see something and then to compare that image with something they have in mind that you've already taught them that it is. And they say, oh yeah, that's what that is. That's a table. I can't go through it. I have to go around it. And because this is what tables are for. And so you might think that that's just what we do. We just do it really fast, right? What Heidegger is going to show you in section 15 is that that is not at all how we deal with things in the world, right? It's just not the way that we see. That's not the kind of knowledge that we have. That is the kind of knowledge that a computer has. And this is one reason why some people think computers will never be quite like humans, because we don't do it like that. We don't have a filing system where we just know things as things that are present at hand by their shape or their size or their color or their characteristics, their category, right? Categorically knowing them. And then that we refer to that and we say, oh yeah, okay, that thing, that looks like a hammer. What do you do with a thing that looks like that? You hammer with it. So that's what I need to do to put this thing that looks like a nail. What is a nail for? It's for, like, we don't do that. We just don't have this catalog of things that we refer to and file away and therefore know. That isn't what knowledge is. So what Heidegger wants to get at here then is, what kind of knowledge is it that uses things? Because this is what we do all the time. So we're going to jump down just a couple sentences. In the domain of the present analysis, what we're going to do right now, the entities we shall take as our preliminary theme are those which show themselves and are concerned with the environment. Now remember, we're still going to do phenomenology, which is to let that which shows itself show itself in the very way that it shows itself from itself, right? So we're going to let things show themselves. What sorts of things? Well, the things that show themselves in our concern with the environment. Think of your environment as your immediately surrounding space, right? Our environment is this classroom right now. It's bound by 4 walls. It's largely just this room, right? Such entities, the things that we concern ourselves with in this room, right? Those things are not thereby objects for knowing the world theoretically. They are simply what gets used, what gets produced, and so forth. The things in the world around us, they're not here to say, hey, get to know the world. We don't care anything about the world. And we don't even look at them to say, what do you have to tell me about the world? Even though Heidegger wants us to understand the world, he's going to start by looking at things that don't ever tell us anything about the world. And you might say, well, then why are we doing that? Why don't we just start talking about the world? And the reason is because the world is a phenomenon that hides behind the things in the world. So if you want to understand the world, you first have to look to things that don't seem like they have anything to say about the world. They just do what they do with us. But if we just scratch below the surface, we're going to see something like the world emerge in our relationship to the things in our environment, right? They are simply what gets used, what gets produced, and so forth. As entities so encountered, that is, as entities that gets used or get produced. For instance, right now, what in the world of your immediate environment are you using? A book? A chair? Desk? If you take notes, even if you're not right at this very moment, you're going to use a pen or a pencil and notebook or paper, right? You're also using things that you don't even think of when I just asked that question, like shirt, pants, and other items of clothing. Why are you using those things? To produce comfort, right? Both physical comfort in terms of temperature regulation, but also some social comfort, right? Because if you and I were not wearing clothes, there might be a level of awkwardness that we would not really appreciate. So there's a kind of familiarity that we use these things for, to promote in ourselves, right? To make us feel comfortable in our environment. So we're using things and producing, right? We're using a book, hopefully, to produce understanding, or knowledge, or something. Okay, moving onward then. Let's just jump the next page. All right, he's going to ask us a question here. Look at the middle of the top paragraph. He starts a sentence that says, those entities which serve phenomenologically as our preliminary theme, in that case, the things that we use and produce things with, right, in our immediate environment. In this case, those which are used and which are to be found in the course of production become accessible when we put ourselves into the position of concerning ourselves with them in some such way. All right, these things become accessible to us when we put ourselves in the position of using them in some way, right? Concerning ourselves with them in some way. Taken strictly, this talk about putting ourselves into such a position is misleading, for the kind of being which belongs to such concernful dealings is not one into which we need to put ourselves first. This is the way in which everyday Dasein always is, right? So the problem he has with these things become apparent to us, or we know what they are. We start to understand pencils and pens and papers and things like that. When we put ourselves in the position of using them, it makes it sound like we sometimes don't do that. But what we're always doing is using things. We just shift the things that we're using, but we're always in the state of using and producing. That is just the way Dasein always is. So we don't put ourselves in the position of using things. We are always already in that position. That is what we are always doing. We're just using things all the time, right? When I open the door, for instance, I use the latch. Okay, so then we might ask the question, well, how is this going to help us to understand the world? And let's jump to the next the very bottom paragraph. It begins, the Greeks had an appropriate term for things. So we're going to look at things. We're going to understand what things are, how we use things, what things become for us. The Greeks had an appropriate term for things, pragmata. That is to say, that which one has to do with in one's concernful dealings. Okay, that is not a definition of pragmata. That is Heidegger speak. But what pragmata is just stuff. The stuff that you use. Pragmatic, have you heard this phrase? This word pragmatic? Anybody want to hazard a definition, like if you say pragmatic or pragmatically?
Realistically?
Realistically, it's pretty good. Like, in the way that you actually use it, not just theoretically, right? But pragmatically speaking instead of hypothetically, right? If I say, oh, hypothetically I could run 20 miles with a 50-pound backpack on my back, but pragmatically, I probably would fall apart, right? Theoretically versus practically, right? So pragmata were just the things you use, the practical stuff, right? As opposed to treasure, which was just there to be